Will, thank you very much. This is Nick Ravenscroft live from Manchester. The Halifax Building Society says that property is now affordable for first-time buyers in nearly 4 out of 10 areas of the UK. Can you believe that? Is that the reality where you live? If you are a first-time buyer, can you now afford to buy a place? 0500 909 693. The Building Society says that the number of areas where homes are affordable to first-time buyers has grown from just 6% to nearly 40%. But the Council of Mortgage Lenders says the average deposit is at 25%, which can mean needing getting together thousands of pounds before you've even started. So, are you a first-time buyer? Are you finding things easier or just as tough? I'd love to hear from you if you're hoping to buy a house this year. 0500 909 693, or you can text me on 85058. With me, Jonathan Davis, Managing Director of Financial Planners Armstrong Davis, an estate agent from Cheshire, Robert Reed, and also Jasmine Birtles, who runs the personal finance website moneymagpie.com. Jonathan Davis, do you buy this?
Well, I do, Nick, but I don't even see why it's news. I mean, all they're telling us is that prices have come down the last couple of years. First-time buyers during 2009 have paid about £134,000 for a starter home and £33,000 deposit. Well, the funny thing is, of course, 80% of first-time buyers' deposits this year have not come from their own resources. It's come from the bank of mum and dad. So obviously, if mum and dad are so stupid to want to put money into property right now, well, you know, and put their kids into debt, well, I don't see the news there. I think it's just shameful and a waste of people's money.
Surely if more first-time buyers are getting involved, then that's only going to help things.
Well, I think when you say help things, you mean raise prices. I don't see how that's going to help things. Actually, it's not the case anyway, because the numbers of transactions are still under 60,000 a month. That's all sales a month in England and Wales during 2009. And long-run monthly averages are more 110,000 a month. So, you know, the fact that prices have risen this year is all hot air. It's entirely down to £200 billion of government stimulus, which means our taxes are going up over the next 10 years. Interest rates will rise. Public sector spending will fall. This is not conducive to long-term rises in house prices.
Robert Reed, you're an estate agent. You've got a bit of a quizzical look on your face.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, Jonathan's analysis is quite interesting, but I think I would probably look at it a completely different way and tackle it a different angle. As I would see it, the most significant change in the market, the prices have fallen, but I think the most significant thing from a first-time buyer's perspective is this need for the deposit, as Jonathan identifies. Because I think if you ask the first-time buyer today, they'd probably say it's a lot harder for them, actually, than even 3-4 years ago. Because although prices have come down, you were getting, I'm not saying it was right, but you were getting 100% mortgages or what have you. Whereas now, probably sensibly, you need 20-25%. Now, if I look at Cheshire, my patch, the cheapest part of Cheshire, probably Crewe, where you could buy a terraced house for sort of 80-90,000. But even so, that's still 18,000 quid on a 20% deposit, which is a lot of money for people to have to get together. But I don't really see why it's a bad thing. If people's mums and dads want to support their children going into the housing market, Jonathan seems to think that's a terrible thing. I think it's up to people how they spend their money, and I don't really see why that's a negative thing. It's just the way people are having to adapt to get onto the ladder.
And are you seeing more first-time buyers coming into your office?
Yeah, well, there's always a demand, and again, it rather depends on the area. If we take 12 months ago, interestingly enough, in January of 2009, the majority of my transactions were at the relatively speaking, lower end. I work in Tarpley, and at the lower end in Tarpley is probably 150 to 200 or thereabouts. It's a relatively expensive area. But we saw quite a lot of activity there in January, February, March, which then flowed up. But I do agree with Jonathan that it's probably, getting deposits possibly via parents, or, the other thing is that the single person on the housing ladder, first-time buyer, becoming increasingly rare. People are on the whole waiting until they marry or they move in with a partner or whatever.
Well, let's speak to a first-time buyer from the other end of the country, from Colchester. Matthew Crawton. Matt, what's your experience? What's your situation?
Well, my personal situation, thanks for having me on the show as well, was that my parents live in another country, so I'm sort of supporting myself in Colchester. I recently qualified as a nurse. Was obviously going to have to move in out of university accommodation into a new property. So I was left with, a couple of options, obviously renting, perhaps moving in with a friend in a similar sort of scenario, or try and look at purchasing a property. I think, as someone already mentioned, from the bank of mum and dad. And it sort of made sense when we sort of ran the numbers that rather than, perhaps putting the same amount of money in a rent scheme towards a landlord, that it worked out that I'm now paying that rent off in my mortgage each month. So it's either I pay it off and lose the money in rent, or perhaps hope to recuperate some money in the future by at least getting some sort of investment for my money.
Jasmine, what do you make of this?
Well, I think actually there are all sorts of things that have come up. Firstly, I do think long term, and by long term I mean 5-10 years hence at least, property is a decent investment. Not the only investment. I get very fed up when people say, "Oh, I'm not going to bother with a pension. I'm just putting all my money into property." They're not saying that so much now, but they used to. But I think long term, yes, it is a good investment for all sorts of. I mean, basically supply and demand. We're a small island. We're living longer. We're more and more single households. The pressure on the housing market is going to continue. However, short term, I think, for many people, buying right now is not really necessary. I mean, I think we still have this hangover. We have a great love affair with property, which is not really justified. Nothing like as much as we thought it was. And I think if you're a first-time buyer and you're desperate to get on the housing ladder, you have to ask yourself why. Really, why is it that you want to get on now? Because for many people, it would be better actually to wait a year or even 2 years.
Well, let's ask Matt, why? Why now?
I guess it was partly because I wanted control of my own property. That was quite important to me, being out of control where I am and the different things about that. I think that's a common link between all homeowners. But as I say, to me, I was paying similar amount of money, probably slightly more actually, considering what my mortgage rate was, towards rent in the property location where I am, which is a very high demand area because it's a university town.
Important question though is now, if the interest when the interest rates go up, will you be able to continue to pay that mortgage?
I guess it would depend on how much they went up. I think they would have to go up several percentage points for me not to be able to afford it. And if that became the case, then I would obviously consider selling or perhaps renting it out and perhaps getting more than what the mortgage might cost in rent in another sort of scheme such as that.
Jonathan, isn't this exactly the sort of time that someone like Matt should be getting into the market? You want to get in before prices really start to rise?
Oh, come on. The house price crash started in September 2007, and it's still ongoing. Look, of course we've had a rise in prices in 2009, and the stock market's risen as well, and gold's risen as well. Everything's risen this year because of government borrowings of unprecedented amounts. Take away that government borrowings and pumping into the economy, there's nothing holding up this economy. And your caller there has hit the nail on the head, as has basically Jasmine. When interest rates rise, and they will rise for years and years, then first-time buyers will soon see what it's like to have a massive debt, which is not going to fall, and yet their costs are only going to rise. Look at the general economy. Taxes are going to rise. We know that. Public sector spending is going to fall. That means, unfortunately, higher unemployment. Then you look at the amount that the government has borrowed in our name, which is gargantuan. That means interest rates will rise over the next 5 to 10 years. What's that going to do to the housing market in the next 5 to 10 years? It's not going to be positive, put it that way.
Well, that will hit you in the pocket then, Robert. You're an estate agent.
Absolutely. So I'm going to have to work extremely hard, aren't I, and try and do my best against the market. I mean, I think the interesting thing is that my analysis of the market the last 12 months, I sold a lot more houses. I mean, a significant amount more houses in 2009 than 2008.
Well, of course you did, because of government stimulus.
Jonathan, let me finish my point. I would actually say I don't necessarily agree that prices have gone up in that period. I actually think the reason that the transactions went up was that prices were, it might be very stable throughout the year, and probably, there was, if anything, percent or so, difference. I think it was very, very steady on the prices. So
according to Nationwide, it went up by just under 6%.
Yeah, well, these house price surveys, I think, are a load of nonsense. And the reason I say that is that you've got, if I take the company I work for, we've got 5 offices in Cheshire, and each office has behaved quite differently. Now, and you can see different trends in that small, tight geography. You put that over a whole country, and I don't see where you get that. But I think the difference is, I'm not sure that. I think the problem is we've become accustomed to linking success to rapidly rising house prices. Now, I think that's all a bit crazy. In reality, I don't think the price is necessarily going to fall a lot. It might just be that they just go very steady and are about the same level in 5 years to where we are now. Now, when you consider that the market doubled from the year 2000 to the year 2007, 100% growth pretty much, fallen by, say, 20%. If we now go steady for 5 or 6 years, I think the public out there, I sense, are probably content with that. I think they're okay with that. And I think they'll buy if they sense stability. It's when there's rapidly either rising or falling prices, that's when you get nervousness.
I mean, you suggest that people in the UK are fixated on house prices. I mean, given the ups and downs of recent years, do you think that's going to change, Jasmine?
Well, it's a very good point. Now, I really do think that we're fixated, and as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm thinking, the sensible thing would really be actually for, as Jonathan says, for prices to continue to go down. But because psychologically, as a country, our sense of our wealth and our security, etc., is so bound up in house prices, I think that whoever is in power, whichever party is in power, will get the jitters if prices of housing goes down much further, and they may try again to put it up artificially, which would be a shame, I think, because we need to let the market find its level and then build up solidly on solid earnings, something of solid value, rather than constantly trying to hike it up.
Matt, did you ever consider not buying your own property?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an immediate decision, and I have to say, obviously, that my own decisions were vastly mediated by my own local areas. I've heard, sorry, I've forgotten the name of the estate agent that you have on your programme at the moment.
Yeah.
These are very specific issues. I mean, for instance, Colchester, as I said already, is a university town. Prices for rent are a lot higher per bedroom than the purchase price. Just to run some rough figures, I don't mind about secrecy. If my mortgage is currently about £380 a month, I've already been quoted over £800 a month I could get in rent.
I think I might do that.
Discrepancy. Yeah,
sounds good.
It's a no-brainer.
So, I mean, obviously, my own decisions were revolving around that kind of idea that, I'm putting so much money away to not get anything back. I mean, at least, okay, like you say, the market might dip, the market might turn, interest rates might go up.
And in that case, you're making 500 quid profit at the moment by renting it out, or you would be. If interest rates went the other direction, if they headed north, you'd be in all kinds of trouble.
That is a possibility, but again, I'm tied into only a 2-year fixed term. Now I know there are costs involved and so on and so forth, but I think at least I guess it is a bit of a gamble, obviously. But I think if I was renting, I'm definitely going to be losing £500 a month. I'm never seeing again.
I think for different people, it's a different thing. For you, it sounds like it is a sensible decision. I think to do this, particularly if you keep an eye on the figures, make sure that you pay off as much as you possibly can. This is one of my mantras: is pay off your mortgage. Just pay off your mortgage. Do not pass go. Do not collect 200. Just pay off your mortgage as fast as you possibly can.
I do make overpayments as well. Yeah,
Good,
I do recommend
excellent.
That.
Yes. Keep on doing that, and keep your eye on the interest rates. I mean, the average of interest rates is 6%, and for mortgages it's more like 8%. So it could easily, we've got a little way for it to go up just to get to the average, and it could get further above that. But I think it will take a little while for the interest rates to go up because the economy is so fragile at the moment. But do keep that in mind, and yeah, definitely, if you can keep in mind the possibility that you could rent it out, and if you're willing to do that, then that I think covers you in large measure.
Jonathan, you have been hammering home this idea that there is no real recovery in house prices, that it's essentially because of the government injecting all this cash.
Exactly.
Do you think that the lending criteria of the banks should be loosened up a bit? Because that's one of the things that first-time buyers are still struggling with. There are lower interest rates, yes. House prices are lower than they were, yes. But it's still pretty difficult to get a mortgage.
Fabulous. It's so good that it is, because otherwise people like Matt, who has got such short-termist thinking, I can't believe what I'm hearing from the guy. People will get themselves into enormous debt. Society is already in enormous debt, but even more people will get into even more debt. Look, the simple reason why banks aren't lending, although when you listen to the British Bankers Association, they'll say that lending is back to 2 years ago. Actually, within the figures, the bulk of the lending is going to large multinationals. It's not going to small businesses and mortgage borrowers. The simple reason why banks are not lending to mortgages in the same way that they were up till a couple of years ago is because they know that the market has no future. They know that the risks are huge. That's the reason why they're not lending, and they will not increase their lending significantly, listen to me, for another 10 years at least.
Loud and clear. Rob, Matthew can stick up for himself, but this idea that he's very short-term, he's thinking.
Well, I have to say, I think Jonathan's being extremely patronising to Matthew particularly, and I actually think, Matthew, if you take the financial circumstances which he's told us about here, I think he's in a considerably better position than many people with their mortgages and what have you. So I actually think whilst Jonathan's overall point might have some credibility to them, I think to sort of pick Matthew as an example of someone who's making a bad short-term decision, I think is nonsense, and I think it's wrong, Jonathan. I'll say that now. I think the other thing I would say is that there was an interesting question about sentiment. Earlier on you were talking about why is it we've got this obsession with property. There is a resentment, I think, to renting in this country. I mean, it's quite interesting if you go to Germany, there's a lot of renting that goes on. But I think over here people do see it as dead money, or they'll do it as a short-term whilst they're waiting for the right house. But when you're trying to save up for a deposit, at the moment, which is crucial, it is galling, when people are thinking, crikey, there goes another 750 quid in rent. And
it's not less bother, though.
Well, you say that, but of course, you see it going the other way around, and when, of course, people weren't buying, and then prices double, people say, well, you should have got in then. So, it is a tricky balance. But I think that's one of the reasons why I think there's always people wanting to come into the market, because it is psychological. People think, hold on a minute, I'm paying out £750 a rent, or whatever it may be. Actually, I would like to pay that, and at least own the thing. At least I can change the kitchen, I can do whatever I want with it.
No, because people want to come into the market because estate agents and bankers and mortgage brokers tell them that they can't lose with property.
Well, I'm not saying, Jonathan, Jonathan, listen.
If they
listen.
Rented,
just let him make his point.
Themselves from massive capital losses and getting their homes repossessed. That would be the result of renting over the next few years, as it has been from the end of 2007 to the beginning of this year until the money printing came in.
Well, I think Jonathan's making a lot of gross generalisations. I'm not saying you can't lose on property.
I'm an economist. You're a salesman.
Jonathan, you said that all estate agents are saying you can't lose on property. Did I say that? Did I say that?
Everyone knows that's what estate agents imply all the time.
Well, I'm not saying that. With property, it goes up and down, and it should be absolutely no mistake about that. I still think if you look at the overall longer-term direction of travel, there is a housing shortage in the country, because before the
there is no housing shortage.
Well, that is an absolute statement.
There is no housing shortage. If that was the case, why did house prices fall 25% from October 2007 to February 2009?
Well, if that's the case,
there is no housing shortage.
Well, with respect, if that's the case, why did house prices rise 100% from the year 2000 to the year 2007?
Because of easier and easier credit, which has now been stopped.
Not sustainable.
And
I agree.
Because of reduced interest rates, they cannot go down any further. There's only one direction they're going, and that is up.
I agree it wasn't sustainable, by the way. I'm not saying I agree with... I'm very pleased that, that more equity has been brought into the system.
Let's take a caller on this. Andy is in Cambridge. Andy.
Hello there.
Hello, you're on 5 Live. I'm fine.
Yeah, fine. Right, Rosie, come on in. Sorry, get the dog in. Right, yes, I'm very nearly 60 now, and I can't remember the interest rates being as low as they were. I mean, I have savings on the post office and the bank, and I have the full allocation on the national NSI premium bonds. But why are mortgage rates so high when the interest rate is so low? I mean, surely that to benefit the country, the banks and mortgage providers should be providing mortgages and rates for loans at the level that, or slightly above the level that the government has set for interest rates.
Jasmine, what can you tell Andy?
Well, they're not that high. Yes, certainly compared with the Bank of England base rate. Yes, they are higher, unless of course you have a tracker mortgage. I mean, I know people whose mortgages are about 1.5%. You know, really, that's what they're paying. So quite a lot of people actually have very low mortgages. Others still have, relatively low. I mean, 3.5%, 4%. That's not high, certainly compared to the average, the sort of the last 30 years.
I agree with that, because most people are on this 1.5% because of the agreement they've got with the banks and building societies and tracker mortgage is followed the rate down.
Yes.
So, but when you offer a new mortgage or new loan, particularly with some interest rates on some companies, you're looking at 10-12%. So why aren't they down, comparative levels with the interest rates we've been offered at the moment by the government?
Yeah, well, I actually haven't heard of mortgages at that rate, but those rates, those ones sound like the sort of the rates that people are offered if their credit rating is very poor. And as you know, that lenders do this with all types of loans. They will build in the risk. But then you've got certainly, I mean, I think definitely there are a number of banks and lenders who are lending at a few percent above the Bank of England base rate. Firstly, to claw back a bit of money, thank you very much. And secondly, those that are for fixed rates over the next 2 or 3 years, I think they've built in also the expectation that interest rates are going to go up. Now, they don't want to lose. Whatever rate they fix at for the next 2 or 3 years, they have to fix at. And if interest rates go up to 6% and they're offering it at 3.5%, well, they're going to lose quite a lot for that time. So I think that's part of the issue as well.
Jonathan, do you think...
There again, the fact that we've bailed most of these banks and building societies out, and they're still trying to make a vast profit out of us. I don't think that cuts the mustard, really.
Well, hey, you take it up with the banks, but and they I'm sure will not admit to that. But I think that's very much in there because they've all lost a lot of money and they want to claw it back.
Take it up with your politicians. Write to your MP. I couldn't agree more. It's a disgrace. Write to your MP.
Well, there's no point in that because most of them are creaming the system anyway, aren't they?
There you go.
Andy, thank you for your call.
Thank you very much. Bye then.
Jonathan, you have been pretty downbeat this evening. Final question. Do you think that we have reached the bottom in terms of house prices at any rate, and are we on the way back up?
No, we've had a rise in prices this year, but we haven't had a rise in market activity. I'm afraid I don't know the estate agent's name, but as he will know, the estate agency has had a dreadful couple of years. 40% of estate agents are no longer in the business, and hundreds and hundreds of estate agent offices have been closed, shut down, businesses gone bust. In terms of prices, ultimately comes down to when the money printing stops. What does money printing mean? It means government borrowings. We know it's going to continue for a number of years. What we don't know is whether or not it's just going to go straight into bank coffers or if indeed it somehow is going to get into society. I don't believe that it will get into society in terms of lending. So I think after the next election, which, as we know, is just around the corner now, I think we're going to see higher taxes, smaller public sector spending, higher interest rates in due course. We already know building societies are raising their interest rates, whatever the Bank of England does. Thus, house prices are going to go back down again. Don't ask me what's going to happen this month or next month, but I'll say to you over the next 2 or 3 years, I'm expecting 20 to 30% to come off from this point. Final thoughts to you, Robert Reid.
Well, I hope I'm still here in a few years' time to discuss house prices because I might not be if Jonathan's right. But I would say if I'll put my money where my mouth is. If you wanted me to predict where we'll be in say 3 years' time, 3-4 years' time, I think we'll probably see falls and rises in the market. I think that is right, and I think we're going to be about where we are now. I don't think we're going to see a lot of difference.
OK, Robert Reid, Jonathan Davis, and Jasmine Birtles. Thank you all very much.